Welcome to Dedham and welcome to the Church of St Mary the Virgin. We should really perhaps just mention the Dedham of 500 years ago, because at that time the population of Dedham was round about 5,000 people, and if we look at today's population within the Dedham, it's less than 2,000. So you will find that all over East Anglia there are churches which have got flint towers, and this particular tower is in fact the largest by volume. And the reason for all of these towers and all of these churches in villages throughout East Anglia was that the wealthy weavers were looking for a way to guarantee their place in the next life. So this particular tower is, I said, the largest by volume in East Anglia, and it is a little bit different. Most towers with using knapped flint use a piece of flint which has been split and then pressed into wet cement. This has not happened in this church. Every single piece of flint has in fact been cut into a brick. And why all of this expense was being used to build this church? Well, we believe that it was the mother of Henry VII, Margaret Beaufort, that made the money available. And this huge amount of money enabled this tower to be built in a slightly different way. You will notice that each of these flints have been cut into the shape of a brick. That is time consuming and very, very expensive. So now we've established, or we believe, that Margaret Beaufort provided the money to build this tower. And as we pass through on this tour, you will see many little clues which indicate that Margaret Beaufort has left her mark on this tower. And one potential is in fact what we call the Maria monogram. Here is the Maria monogram, and you can see here the M and an A and an R, and in fact you could say, well, that's because it's Maria. But no, it could be Mary, and Mary being Margaret Beaufort perhaps. We also have a crown, and of course the crown could be the King of Heaven, or it could be an allusion to her son, King Henry VII. Right, we're going to pass now into the Galilee Arch. And as we look up into the Galilee Arch, what is the first thing we see? We see on every other section a portcullis. Why have we got a portcullis on our roof? Well, the answer is probably that Margaret Beaufort's coat of arms was in fact a portcullis, and the portcullis is appearing all over this roof. A very strong clue that she provided. She's put her mark on this tower, which she paid for. The other thing to notice is, of course, on the right-hand side we have the White Rose of York, and on the left-hand side we have the Red Rose of Lancashire. And of course, all of this happened at the War of the Roses, and it was her son defeating Richard at the Battle of Bosworth that brought about the end of the War of the Roses. And the Tudor Rose now appears in the middle. And the Tudor Rose, of course, is a combination of the White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster. And that is clearly shown in the middle of the church roof. In addition to the Tudor Rose, we can see two people appearing on either side of that column. They were in fact the Webb family, Tom Webb and Joan Webb. They were wealthy weavers in Dedham, and they provided much of the finance that took part inside the church. And within the church we do in fact have the Webb Memorial. So here we are on the north side of the church, and looking at the tower you can see that there is quite a lot of evidence of refurbishment. All of these new stones here were actually paid for by English Heritage, and one of the rules of English Heritage is that you must use the original materials wherever possible. This church was actually using stone from Caen in France. So we had to ship the stone back from France to actually do this refurbishment. And as you can see here, all of the new sections of stone quite clear. And for any of you who are wondering what these discs are as you go up the church, they are in fact tie rods. Structural problems with this church tower resulted in it having to be strengthened, and these tie rods pass right through the tower and are holding the church tower together. And if we look up here, you can see one of the marks the mason's mark to show that they in fact are, that is their stamp. This is our work, we've done this work, and this is our mark.
We're going to start our tower tour from here, but just before we do, I have to let you know that the stairs are quite narrow, and that but they are very, very safe. It's very easy to move up them. There's no hurry, so we can go up them at our own pace, and there's no problems at all. And before we go up, I wanted to let you know that when they built this, of course, the steps up the tower were wooden steps, and until quite recently, they were quite dangerous. So approximately 100 years ago, people put money together to actually try and refurbish the church steps, and then more recently, an organisation in Dedham here called the Friends of Dedham Church decided to come up with a great idea that everyone could pay for a step all the way up to the top, that they could have their names added to them. So all of the people that donated £300 were in fact listed here, and they go, as you see them, as you go up, you can see, and the last one, of course, nearest to heaven is the vicar. Now, I'm not quite so far up, I'm on that one there. As we move around the church, you'll see a lot of these plates here. These are called plumber's plates, from the word plum for lead, and the lead work that's in the church here has to be changed from time to time because lead doesn't last, and wherever there's a plumber's plate, you'll find out that people were so proud of their lead work that they did in fact make a plate and said, I've done this work. And these are plates that were from previous roofs on this church. And as we move around in the ringing chamber, you'll see others, and you'll see a number of plumber's plates, and you can see the dates from them. That particular one, as you can see, was from the 17th century, 16th century, 17th century. As you can see, we're now in the ringing chamber, and for those of you that asked me questions about the tie rods that pass through the church, you can see them here. The ones that are steel, which are the pairs that go through here, are in fact the latest ones. The ones above them are the first attempts, where in fact beams were put in place, and you can see where they used to drive in wedges. That was to have the same effect, but not quite so effective as the modern way of doing it, which is in fact putting tie rods in. So those are in fact, you can see here, all of the attempts that were actually made to strengthen the tower. The tower was never going to look quite like this, and the church was never going to quite look like this anyway, because this would have been normally open. This door would not have been there, these walls would not have been here. The original idea was to have a number of flutes all the way down the centre of the church here. You can see 4 of them here. That would have been very interesting because the light here would have flooded right the way through the entire church here. And outside those doors, in fact, is the organ. The organ never used to be there. The organ was at the right-hand side of the church further down, and in actual fact, it was quite recently that the organ was placed in its position now. So, within here, you can see many things which are quite interesting. We spoke about ringing the bells, and here we have what's called peal boards. And if you look up on these boards here and these boards here, you can see that there were a group of people that came into this church and rang every combination of 7. So 7 bells were rung, so in actual fact those combinations would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1, 3, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1, 4, so and so, so and so. And every combination was rung, and as you can see, it took them 3 hours, 3.5 hours, and so forth, and you can see there was 5,000 400 changes in one particular occasion. And you can also see that the Saunders family were quite busy and regular visitors.
Still guiding us through days and nights, where the beauty lies.
This is an interesting clock. It was built in London in 1780 and used to be a one-day clock. So basically it meant that every day this clock had to be wound. And as you can imagine, it's not easy to find people that are prepared to come up every day to come and wind the clock. Some years ago it was decided to change the clock and modify it to a 3.5-day clock. So now the clock is wound on a Wednesday and on a Sunday. And there are a group of volunteers that have a roster, and we come up here and wind the clock, which, as you remember, consists of basically winding up a lead weight, about 60 kilograms, from the level we saw in the ringing chamber to just about here. And over a period of 3.5 days, that weight will descend, and in doing so does two things. There are two weights. One of the weight drives the clock, and the other weight drives the chimes. This clock chimes on the hour every hour and does so 24/7. So people in the village here seem to think that, you know, it's, if it doesn't ring, there's something quite seriously wrong. And when the clock doesn't get wound properly, it rings some very strange hours in the middle of the night as well. These bell ropes now move only the clapper and not the bell. But when we go upstairs, you will see that the bells that are presently hanging down in this direction have in fact you can still see the remnants of the rope pulleys where they used to go all the way around and when the bells were pealed. So that is something that's just quite interesting as well.
Where the world was all in peace, our friend rest,
Top of the tower, as you can see, and from here we can see a number of things. And one thing perhaps that's quite interesting, if you haven't been up here before, is that in the distance in that direction, which is of course east, you can see the cranes of Felixstowe in the distance, just through the mist there, and you can see the river. That's the River Stour. And of course we've got the Stour here as well. The river that runs all the way through this tributary here is in fact freshwater until it reaches Manningtree, when it reaches the sea. So it's tidal from Manningtree that side, and this side is freshwater. So in the other direction, this direction here on the far side, over in that far direction, you can see that square block on the horizon. That is in fact the tower of the church of Soprano. Very similar to this one, and it's actually 8 miles away from, as the crow flies from here. So that's what you're looking at on the horizon that direction. Okay. One thing to remember is that this was a medieval village, going back 500-600 years ago. So all of the houses would have been of medieval construction, and they would have just had straw roofs which discharged onto the street. As the village developed, of course, people became conscious of the fact that fashions changed and building fashions changed. And one of the things you'll notice when you look down into the village is that from the street level, a lot of the houses originally of medieval construction have now been turned into what looks like Georgian construction. The Georgian construction is a square image from street level. So if you look over the balcony here, you'll see Sherman's house, which we'll talk about in a moment, and a number of other houses which have had additions to them to make them look like Georgian, when in actual fact they're not. Sherman's house in particular, which is the house you see down there with the clock face, the sundial on the front, that is a particularly interesting house.
blessed
into a Georgian facade because in fact, as you can see, the wall, it is in fact covered 2 bedrooms 2 feet away from it. So here we are in the ringing chamber, and I have the pleasure of introducing to Colin. Colin is a bell ringer and he knows a lot more about these bells than I do, so I'm going to pass it over to him and I'm going to grab my bell rope.
So you have your opportunity to make a little bit of music while you're in the tower. The church bell is about the only instrument that I can play because I'm tone deaf and they don't need tuning. Fortunately they are tuned. So there are 8 bells here, as Peter explained earlier, and they are actually tuned to an octave. And I couldn't have told you that, but the musicians in the village tell me that's the case. So bell 1 is actually the same note as bell 8, and they are sequential from bell 1 at the western end, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the peal boards that Peter showed you earlier shows that the ringers practiced a lot so that they could ring full changes, which could take them 3 to 3.5 hours, after which they would certainly need a pint and they could get across to the local pub fairly quickly. I'm not going to detain you that long because you'll miss your lunch. But just to give you a couple of changes that we can ring so you can hear the difference between 2 changes. One will be simply sequential. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we'll do that twice. And then we'll reverse in pairs. So we'll go 2, 1, 4, 3, 6, 5. But a change always finishes with the tenor bell. So the last pair doesn't change. But I'll conduct. It's not too much to remember, but I'll conduct anyway. We'll just do 1 round to practice. So, and this will give you an idea about how heavy it is to pull and get the clapper to strike the bell. So, yes, it's easier if you hold the thick bit, which is known as the sally, but it doesn't matter if you can't. But we do have steps for anyone who's more diminutive than others, if you want to stand on a step. But let's go 1.
Just pull it.
Yes.
It won't come down, will it?
No. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's very good. Okay, so we're going to do that now twice, and then we'll go around twice reversing. But I'll point and conduct. Reversing in pairs. So where you've just followed Angela, and you'll do that twice.
Yeah.
On the 3rd time around, you will be the first.
Yeah.
And Angela will follow you. Jane, followed by Graham. Lynn, followed by David. But number 8 always lasts, so Peter then followed by Martin every time. So, 1. Go.
This church has many interesting features to it. We focus today on the Tower Tour, but of course there's many other things that we normally tell everybody about our church. We have one of the only original religious paintings that Constable painted, so that's up there. We have many interesting features, but one of the things that people often ask, and I can see why they ask, is that graffiti. Most churches have got graffiti, and as we go through various doorways, you can see that people have taken the trouble to actually carve their name and the date and who they were and where they're from. But if you look on this particular column here, and that particular column there, you can see graffiti. But it starts at a rather high level. And you ask yourself, why is graffiti at that level and not at ground level? Well, the answer was many reasons, but in this particular group of graffiti, there in fact was a gallery across here, and in that gallery we had the boys' choir from the school opposite, and of course boys being boys, they decided to put their initials up there, and if you look on some of those dates, you can see they are quite ancient.
Blessed be thy friend, dear to us we send, we the beauty lies, and the world moves on in peace. Our friend